It was raining hard that afternoon in Portland, the kind of downpour that sent rivulets of water racing across asphalt like tiny rivers breaking free. I sat in the driver's seat of my old sedan, wiper blades swiping back and forth in a steady rhythm, trying to ignore the chill that crept in through the thin insulation of the car door. Through the rain-cooled window, I watched toddlers clutching blankets and parents hurrying beneath umbrellas slip inside the small brick building of Little Leave's Daycare. My heart eased with the thought of seeing Side's bright smile, her tiny frame waddling toward me, ponytails bobbing like eager antennae. In that moment, everything felt normal, routine, safe. Then my phone buzzed on the passenger seat, shattering the quiet hum of the heater. I reached across, my hand trembling slightly as I unlocked the screen. I expected a text from Belle, probably asking if I'd be home in time for dinner or whether we needed more almond milk. Instead, the message that glowed back at me knocked the breath from my lungs. Moving to France with Jaime. I emptied our savings. Good luck paying rent. My fingers hovered over the screen, numb and uncertain. I blinked, reread the words, and felt the metallic taste of panic flood my mouth. Friends, our savings, those painstakingly accumulated dollars gone. And Jaime, her co-worker, the just a friend she'd introduced at awkward dinner parties. The engine ticked as it cooled. My mind raced through the last few months, replaying every conversation and stolen glance I dismissed. Had I missed something? The late-night phone calls, the hushed tones, the way her eyes had flicked away whenever I mentioned our future. It didn't matter now. Belle had made her choice, and she'd taken everything with her. I opened the door, steering the umbrella through the storm as I hurried toward the entrance. Rain dripped from its canopy like tears, soaking the collar of my jacket. Inside, Sadie sat cross-legged on a tiny plastic chair. Finger paint smeared across her backpack in a riot of pink and purple. Her little tongue peeked between her lips and concentration as she stuck stickers onto a paper cut out of a dinosaur. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her face lighting in an explosion of delight. "Daddy!" she squealed, dropping her brush in a puddle of water on the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her mania for attention still adorable, even as my chest tightened. I scooped her into my arms, lifting her to my shoulders so she could wrap her arms around my neck. Her laughter rang out, a bell-like sound that should have been comforting. Instead, it twisted me with guilt. How could I tell her that Mommy was gone, that everything we'd worked for had vanished overnight? I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the tang of crayons and shampoo, and forced a smile that I hoped looked reassuring. "Hey, kiddo," I said, smoothing the wet strands of hair that clung to her forehead. She babbled on about a game she played with Miss Karen, but I only heard fragments. Funny hat, run in the rain. My eyes. Sadie bounded ahead, chattering about painting rainbows at school, oblivious to the storm raging in my chest. I slipped off my wet coat, draped it over a chair, and guided her to the kitchen table, where she immediately grabbed coloring pencils and set to work. I pulled my laptop onto the table and logged in. The login screen slid away to reveal our joint savings account. Now an empty spreadsheet with only one glaring figure, $0. My heart thundered as I clicked through to checking. There it was, $319. $20,000 had been drained overnight, leaving us with pennies and despair. I stared at the numbers as though they'd rearranged themselves into something more hopeful. They didn't. The reality settled around me like a wet blanket. No groceries, no rent, no clue how I keep a roof over our heads. Sadie looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, will you help me color this unicorn?" she asked, lifting a page covered in rainbow arches. Her innocence stabbed me. I forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." I sank into the chair next to her, watching as she carefully traced the outline. But my mind was elsewhere, ticking through options. Borrow from my parents? No, they were retired and barely making ends meet themselves. A payday loan? I'd sink us deeper into debt. Freelance gigs? They paid too little, too slow. What's wrong, Daddy? Said's voice wavered, her big green eyes searching mine. My throat tightened. How could I tell her the truth? Instead, I knelt and put on my most encouraging tone. Nothing, kiddo. Daddy's just thinking about how to make our apartment even nicer. She nodded, her faith in me shining like a beacon. I gulped and kissed her cheek, feeling a swell of both pride and dread. I opened my phone and typed a response to Belle's message, the words stark against my racing pulse. Thanks for letting me know. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The simplicity of it, no anger, no pleading, felt like the only defense I had left. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back to Sadie, determined to shield her from this blow, at least for today. In the echo of the rain against the window, I made a silent promise I would find a way to survive this. Not just for me, but for her. Because in that storm, she was the only light I had left. Back at the apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with a knot in my chest and a screen full of zeros staring back at me. Outside, the rain from earlier had calmed to a whisper, but the storm inside me had only intensified. Sadie was at the corner of the table, legs swinging beneath her chair, tongue peeking out in concentration as she colored a lopsided tree with purple leaves. Every so often, she'd hold it up and ask, "Do you like this color, Daddy?" And I'd nod, each time, smiling like my world hadn't just caved in. I turned back to the laptop and refreshed the bank screen, as if that would somehow change the outcome. Still $31,041 in checking. Savings, accrual, clean zero gone just like that. Years of saving, every bonus, every sacrifice. I could see Belle's handwriting in my head, neatly labeling the folders we kept. Vacation, home fund, emergency. She used to say, "We're not rich, but we're smart." And now she'd taken all of it to fund a new life with Jaime. I scrolled through the transactions, jaw tightening with every line. First, the wire transfer, $118, 200 sent to a bank in Marseille, France. Then 2 hotel charges, a business class ticket to Charles de Gaulle, and a car rental in her name. She wasn't running. She was relocating, rebuilding without me, without Sadie. I picked up my phone and called the bank, fingers cold and stiff. The woman on the line was polite, efficient, but ultimately helpless. Because it was a joint account, sir, both parties had equal access. We cannot reverse the transaction without her authorization. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she understood what it felt like to be gutted by someone you trusted, to be left holding your daughter's hand with nothing but $319 and an empty fridge. After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the beige walls of our apartment, the same walls I once painted with Belle, her laughter echoing as she flicked a paintbrush at me in defiance of my no-mess rule. It didn't feel like a home anymore, just a box filled with shadows and lies. Sadie slid her drawing across the table. "Look, it's a rainbow tree. I made it for you." I swallowed hard and reached for her, pulling her into my lap and hugging her tightly. She giggled, wrapping her little arms around my neck. "You're squeezing too hard." She squealed. I loosened my grip but didn't let go. "Sorry, sweetheart," I whispered. "Daddy's just really proud of you." She kissed my cheek and wriggled back to her coloring. I watched her for a moment longer, then stood up and went to the pantry. 2 cans of soup, a box of pasta, No milk, no eggs, no meat. I did the math in my head. Groceries, rent, power bill. That $319 might stretch a few days if I skipped meals and found a way to keep Sadie's routine intact. I pulled out my phone again and tapped open the Notes app. Emergency plan, I typed. I started listing what I could sell. The TV, my old laptop, the stand mixer Belle swore we needed, but used twice. I kept up some freelance design gigs over the years. Maybe one of my clients could fast-track a project. I could reach out tonight. I had no pride left to lose. As I typed, I couldn't stop thinking about how this had all started. Belle and I met at a marketing workshop in Seattle 6 years ago. I was there because my job required it. She was there because she wanted to run the room, and she did charming, confident, magnetic. She wore ambition like perfume and left people leaning in wanting more. I fell for her fast. When Sadie came along, everything changed. I had a solid job offer from a creative agency, but daycare costs were astronomical, and Belle was on the rise at Horizon Com. So I turned the offer down, stayed home, took on part-time freelance work and diaper duty. I told how she turned toward the wall when we went to bed. I ignored the warning signs, the deleted texts, the missed calls from Jamie, the sudden need for space. She said I was too sensitive, that I was reading into things, that she needed to grow. I thought if I just gave her room, she'd come back to me. I thought love meant staying even when it got hard. Now, standing in the kitchen with an aching stomach and an angry heart, I realized she hadn't just left. She'd erased me from her life entirely, and in the process, she'd robbed our daughter of stability, of security. Sadie looked up again. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner?" she asked. Her voice was hopeful, unaware that our fridge was nearly empty. I smiled even though it hurt. "Sure, honey," I said. "We'll make the best spaghetti ever." She clapped her hands and bounced in her seat, and I stepped into the kitchen, hiding the panic I felt. I boiled the last of the pasta. No sauce, but I mixed in a little butter and salt and called it magic noodles. She ate every bite. After putting her to bed, I sat in the dark living room, only the hallway lights spilling in. I stared at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. No backup plan, no fallback savings. But I still had one thing Belle didn't count on. Fight. Not desperation, not anger, but resolve. I opened my laptop and started emailing every client I'd ever had, offering overnight turnarounds, discounts, whatever it took. Then I pulled up my calendar and started blocking hours. Early mornings before Sadie woke, late nights after she slept. I would build something from the rubble she left behind, because she may have taken the money. But she didn't take Sadie, and I would make damn sure she never could. The next morning dawned pale and hesitant, as though even the sky felt reluctant to meet the day. I shuffled into the kitchen, still in my soaked jacket from yesterday's storm, and flicked on the coffee maker. Steam curled from the pot, filling the apartment with a familiar comfort. But it did little to quell the tightness, knotting my gut. I glanced at the clock, 6:45 a.m. Soon, I'd need to wake Sadie for daycare, field client emails, and begin the uphill climb of rebuilding our lives from the pit where Belle had left us. My phone buzzed against the countertop, dragging me from my spiraling thoughts. I picked it up, bracing myself for another text from Belle or some anonymous tip-off about more drained funds. Instead, the caller ID flashed. Mom Belle's. Of all the voices I never wanted to hear, hers was at the top of the list. I tapped accept, my heart thudding in my ears. "Hello," I said, pressing the phone to my ear as I poured coffee into a chipped mug. "Good morning, Michael," came Margaret's voice, cool and clipped like a porcelain teacup tapping against a saucer. Her tone carried no warmth, only accusation. A loaded inhale that suggested she already had her script memorized. "I've been getting calls from your lawyer." My hand froze mid-pour. "My lawyer?" I echoed, slow and deliberate. I knew she'd have called Nadia, but this felt personal. "Yes," she replied sharply. "She told me you filed for emergency custody and asset freezing." A brief pause, and that you're claiming I blackmailed Belle into giving up visitation unless she sent more money. The world tilted. I stared at the coffee dripping from the machine, the sick realization winding like a snake in my chest. "Margaret," I said carefully, "where are you getting this?" "I have Belle's texts," she said, her voice steady. She showed. I gripped the edge of the counter, nails digging into the laminate. "Margaret, you need to stop listening to lies," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "Biel is the one who emptied our savings. She's the one who fled to France. I have texts." Her texts telling me, in her own words, "Don't gaslight me, Michael." She shot back. "Riel said you threatened her, told her she'd never see Sadi again unless she funded your apartment. And now she's scared. She's defending herself." My stomach revolted. "She's defending herself by stealing our daughter's future," I said, voice low and trembling with rage. "I never threatened her. I asked her to talk to me about money before she wiped us out." Talk, Margaret scoffed. "She tried. You wouldn't listen. You're unstable. I've seen your social media angry rants about her job, her coworker. You've become obsessed." Her words were ice shards sinking into my skin. "I'm going to see Sadi today, and I'll evaluate how safe it is for her to be around you." Time seemed to slow. The coffee machine ticked, then hissed. I raised my hand to steady my shaking jaw. Sadie, my 5-year-old, could be withheld from me based on Belle's lies. Margaret would show up at daycare, unleash her version of events, and I might walk away without my daughter in the back seat. "Margaret, please," I said, swallowing hard. "You know me. You know I'd never hurt my daughter." "I know what she told me," Margaret replied coldly. "I'll see you this afternoon, Michael. Make sure you have your story straight." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the screen, heart thumping like a war drum. The coffee machine clicked off, and the mug sat half full on the counter. I wrapped my fingers around it, feeling its warmth seep into my bones. Then, as though jolted awake, I remembered Sadi, waiting for breakfast. In the living room, she sat on the floor with a puzzle, humming happily. Her hair was a tangle of curls, and she looked up when I entered, her face blossoming into that trusting smile I treasured. "Hi, Daddy," she said, scooting over to hug my leg. I knelt beside her, collecting puzzle pieces with deliberate calm. "Hey, Pumpkin, hungry?" I asked. She nodded, and I carried her to the table. As I made scrambled eggs and toast, I forced my mind to sort out the chaos. I'd expected Belle's betrayal, but her mother's attack was another blow. A reminder that the fight wouldn't be only against my ex-wife, but against an entire family willing to lie to save face. Over breakfast, Satai chattered about her dreams, talking whales and flying squirrels. I smiled and nodded, each bite of toast tasting like a burden. Every laugh she shared was a promise I couldn't break. My world had shrunk to the size of her hand wrapped in mine, and I refused to let anyone sever that bond. After dropping her off at daycare, I sat in the car for a long moment, hands clenched on the wheel. The sun tried to break through ragged clouds, but the morning still felt dull and heavy. I dialed Nadia's number with determined fingers. When she picked up, I spoke quickly. "Nadia, it's me." Margaret called. She's accusing me of blackmailing Belle, threatening refusal of visitation unless she sent money. There was a pause. Then, in her measured voice, "We'll need to address that immediately. Get me copies of any messages Belle sent you and hers to Margaret. We'll request a hearing to refute the allegations before they can impact custody." I exhaled, relief mingling with the tension in my shoulders. Nadia always cut through the noise, turned chaos into strategy. "Thank you," I said. "I'll upload everything tonight." As I turned the key in the ignition, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the empty car seat behind me. Said's seat. My resolve hardened. They could accuse me of any number of things, but they'd never ever separate me from my daughter. Not if I did everything in my power to protect her. And so, with a breath of resolve, I drove away from the daycare. A father with a fierce purpose and a storm far greater than the morning's rain brewing around us. When I was determined to weather for Sadie's sake, after waving goodbye to Sadi at the daycare entrance, I sat in the car for a moment. My reflection ghosted across the rain-speckled windshield. The morning air was crisp, almost electric, as though warning me that each step I took today would carry the weight of everything that had come before. I slipped the key into the ignition and drunk my fingers on the steering wheel, staring at the appointment card in my hand. Belle's old office. 9:00 a.m. I inhaled, smoothed my shirt, and drove through the sleepy Portland streets toward Horizon Calm, where Belle had vanished without so much as a notice. The building loomed ahead, glass facade tinted gray under the overcast sky. I parked in the visitor lot, heart throwing in my ears, louder than the engine clicking off. The lobby was sleek and modern. Marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, potted ferns arched like green canopies, and muted digital displays cycling through corporate announcements. I felt like an intruder in someone else's world. When I reached the reception desk, a young woman glanced up from her computer, brows arching in polite inquiry. "Can I help you?" she asked, voiced the perfect blend of professional warmth and practiced indifference. I cleared my throat, swallowing the lump of dread that had climbed into my throat. "I'm looking for Belle Nolan," I said. I understand she worked here in marketing. I have some personal items to pick up." Her expression flickered, part surprise, part sympathy, before she masked it with protocol. "I'm sorry, sir. Belle resigned 2 weeks ago. She didn't leave any forwarding address. She tapped a few keys. It was effective the day of her resignation. We sent a confirmation letter to her home address on file, but beyond that, there isn't much more I can do." Resigned. That word tasted like betrayal in my mouth. 2 weeks ago, I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the air rush from me. No notice, no meeting with HR, nothing. She shook her head. She gave 3 business days' notice as our policy requires and left. No explanation. She offered a practiced apology. "I'm sorry for what you're going through." I managed a curtain nod, unable to summon genuine gratitude. "Thank you." I turned away, the receptionist's gaze following me with a hint of pity. As I walked back through the lobby, I felt exposed, like I just lost the last thread connecting me to Belle's previous life. She'd meticulously erased her professional identity as well as our shared finances. The ride home was a blur of red lights and gray buildings. But my thoughts circled a single point. Planning. This departure had been planned. Spontaneity didn't comport with secrecy and timing. Belle's quiet slip from the company mirrored the way she had slipped out of our life, leaving only echoes. When I reached the apartment, the front door gave a hollow creak as I stepped inside. Said's artwork, handprints, and bright orange crayon sketches of stick families lined the hallway. I paused, tracing a painted palm with my thumb, remembering how small she'd been when she first pressed her handprint onto the wall. I forced myself to breathe. This place had to feel like home for her. I couldn't let its walls carry the cold weight of Belle's betrayal. I headed to what had once been her home office, a corner of the living room partitioned by a tall bookcase filled with marketing textbooks and knickknacks from conferences. I opened the first drawer of the small desk where she used to settle after she got off work. A few pens, a dog-eared notebook full of campaign ideas, and then a stack of file folders stamped with the Horizon.com logo. I rifled through them, half hoping to find a clue, a name, an address, anything that might explain why she'd left so abruptly. A single envelope lay at the bottom, yellowed at the edges, an envelope addressed to Belle in neat cursive. I picked it up, running my thumb across its surface. The postmark read, May 12th, 3 months ago. Sent from an address in Marseille, France. My pulse quickened. I slit the flap and unfolded the card inside. On the front was a watercolor of a sailboat cutting through azure waves. Inside, Margaret's looping script. Bon voyage, ma chère. Thank you for letting me help with the apartment deposit. Love, Mom. Beneath that was a smaller note. I'm proud of you. Enjoy your new life. I sank onto the edge of the desk, the envelope falling from my numb fingers onto the carpet. My mind spun. Margaret, her mother, had funded the apartment in Marseille 3 months ago, long before Belle's final wire transfer. The money had been funneled discreetly. No suspicious activity flagged by our bank until it was too late. This wasn't a sudden breakup. It was a family conspiracy. Betrayal didn't begin when Belle emptied our account. It began when Margaret cleared her own savings to set her daughter up for an escape. I thought of every phone call, every text message I brushed off his work stress or minor tension. I thought of Margaret's sudden interest in my parenting skills, her unsolicited advice on childcare, her quiet presence at birthday parties, as if she were ingratiating herself for some unknown purpose. I'd welcomed her help, believing her to be a concerned mother-in-law rather than an accomplice. My chest tightened with shame and anger. Saad's laughter drifted from the next room where she was playing with her stuffed giraffe. I wiped my face, clutching the envelope like evidence of a crime. I laid it on the desk and exhaled, voice trembling. You planned this. I whispered to no one. You all planned this. I stood and walked to the living room, glancing at the coffee table strewn with children's books and mismatched socks like breadcrumbs leading me back to reality. I scooped up Saadi and hugged her close, inhaling the faint scent of strawberry shampoo. She giggled and kissed my cheek, and I held her tighter. This wasn't a story about abandonment. It was a story about protection. I would fight for her, even if it meant taking on 2 generations of a family determined to rewrite the narrative. That night, I laid the envelope and card on the kitchen counter. I lit a lamp, its warm glow illuminating the handwritten note. The words "Happy Travels" seemed to mock me, but instead of breaking me, they galvanized a new resolve. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a setup. And now that I'd uncovered their paper trail, the next step was to expose it. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Nadia, scanning the envelope and card with the camera on my phone. My fingers flew over the keys as I explained what I'd found, detailing every transaction and every secret payment. With each sentence, my anger sharpened into clarity. Tomorrow, I would take this to court. I would file motions to recover the illicit funds and prove that Belle and Margaret had colluded to steal our future. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the turning point. And as I tucked Saadi into bed later, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, I whispered, "We're going to be okay, kiddo." In the hush of the apartment, as the night settled around us, I felt a fierce hope take root, a hope that shone brighter than the betrayal, stronger than the lies. I would protect her with every ounce of my being, and I would not let them rewrite our history. The morning I walked into Nadia Kim's downtown office, the sky was clear for the first time in days, as if the heavens had paused to watch what I was about to do. I parked in the metered lot and stood for a moment, staring up at the sleek glass facade of the building. My reflection wavered in the tinted windows. Faces of worry, exhaustion, determination, all tangled together. I straightened my tie, patting my suit jacket to smooth imaginary creases, then stepped inside. The lobby's marble floors gleamed beneath my shoes, and a receptionist looked up with polite curiosity as I approached. I gave my name, Michael Carter, appointment with Nadia Kim, and she nodded, picking up the phone in one graceful motion. "She'll see you now, Mr. Carter," she said, voice calm and reassuring, as though she understood the gravity of my situation. I thanked her and followed her down a short hallway into Nadia's office. Nadia sat behind a dark wood desk, her kind eyes framed by a pair of understated glasses. She rose to greet me, offering a firm handshake that conveyed both warmth and confidence. Her presence felt like an anchor, cutting through the storm of my thoughts. Behind her, shelves lined with legal tomes and framed degrees hinted at the depth of her experience. A large window to her right offered a view of the city's rooftops, where sunlight glinted off distant buildings. "Michael," she said, returning my handshake. "Good to see you. Please have a seat." I settled into the chair opposite her desk, smoothing my palms on my lap. Nadia's assistant slid a thin leather folder across the desk. "I've organized everything you sent over. Belle's texts, Margaret's envelope photocopies, the bank statements, Alex's audio transcript. We're ready to build our strategy." I exhaled, relief mingling with the tension in my chest. "Thank you," I said, voice husky. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Nadia offered a sympathetic nod. "Let's talk through the timeline first, to make sure we haven't missed any details." She opened the folder, revealing color-coded tabs. "We'll start with the initial wire transfer from your joint account to Marseille. Then we'll move to the discovery of the envelope for Margaret, and finally Alex's recording that confirms Jamie's involvement." As she spoke, I watched her hands move deliberately, opening the folder, lifting documents, adjusting her glasses. Every gesture exuded competency. I felt the knot in my stomach loosen, replaced by purposeful clarity. "By freezing those assets," Nadia continued, "we ensure Belle can't dissipate funds before we get a judge's order. We'll file for temporary support payments to cover rent and basic living expenses until she's compelled to comply." She paused, searching my face, "and we'll push for supervised visitation or suspended rights if she continues to pull these stunts." My heart pounded. "Do you really think we can stop her?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Nadia leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Michael, the law's on your side here. She's diverted marital assets, abandoned her parental responsibilities, and now she's enlisting her mother to spread lies. That's not just unethical, it's actionable. We have a solid case." I nodded, drawing strength from her conviction. "Okay, what's next?" She clicked her pen open and tapped it against her notepad. "I'll draft the emergency motion today. We'll request a hearing within 72 hours, citing the urgency of rent, utilities, and child support. We'll submit affidavit from you, Alex, and our bank's fraud department confirming the illegitimate transfers. I'll also file a motion to compel Marie Nolan, Margaret, to produce any communication she had with Belle regarding financial assistance. We need to show collusion." The word collusion landed like a hammer blow. Margaret had wanted to help her daughter. Now she'd unwittingly become an accomplice to theft. I felt a mixture of anger and resolve bubbling within me. "Anything I need to do?" I asked, steeling myself for the work ahead. "Gather any additional documentation you might have. Emails, voicemails, anything that corroborates your timeline. I'll need your detailed affidavit too. Describe how you discovered the transfers, what you and Belle discussed about finances before she left, and any misrepresentations she made." She slid a printed affidavit form toward me. "Fill this out by the end of the day, and we'll file tomorrow morning." I accepted the form, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was more than paragraphs on paper. It was my path to protecting Said's future. Nadia stood, signaling the session was over. "I'll call you tonight with updates. In the meantime, try to rest. I know this is overwhelming, but remember, you're doing the right thing for your daughter." I rose and extended my hand again. "Thank you." "Nadia, really?" She smiled, a hint of compassion softening her professional demeanor. "We'll get through this." On the drive home, I let the city blur past, focusing instead on the next steps, drafting my affidavit, lining up emergency funds, and preparing for court. But beneath my anxiety ran a current of hope. With Nadia's guidance, I felt we could turn the tide. When I pulled into the apartment parking spot, the late afternoon sun filtered through clouds, casting a soft glow. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat and headed inside. Said's laughter drifted from her bedroom. She was watching her favorite cartoon. My chest tightened with affection. I slipped into her room and found her curled beneath a blanket, eyes bright. "Daddy," she exclaimed, scrambling out with a plush giraffe hugged to her chest. "Guess what? I drew a rainbow tree for you again." I sank to the floor, taking the drawing she held out proudly. It was similar to the first, but more elaborate. Roots winding into a heart, clouds raining glitter. "It's perfect," I said, hugging her. Thank you," she yawned, and I scooped her into my arms. Carrying her to the kitchen table, I spread the affidavit form among her crayons, watching her small hand reach for the red pencil. My heart swelled with love and purpose. As she scribbled hearts around the edges of the form, I realized this was more than a legal battle. It was a testament to resilience. Belle and her family might have orchestrated the collapse of our savings, but they couldn't dismantle my commitment to Sadi. Together, Nadia and I would build a fortress of truth around her. That night, after tucking Sadi into bed and kissing her forehead, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write. Each sentence I pinned was a brick in the wall I'd raise against betrayal. Outside, the city lights twinkled, but inside, the glow of my laptop illuminated more than text. It illuminated hope. I would fight this war chapter by chapter, affidavit by affidavit, until my daughter's future was reclaimed. For her, I would not falter. I would not yield. In that moment, I tasted the first sweetness of victory, and it was all the more precious because it was for her. A few days later, just as the autumn sun was beginning its lazy descent, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I glanced up from the kitchen counter where I was packing sandwiches for Sadi's after-school snack. It was 3:17 p.m. Barely enough time to get her from daycare and still make it to my meeting with Alex. I swiped to answer, steeling myself. "Hello," I said, shouldering my bag. "Michael Carter?" The voice was tentative, hushed. A woman trying not to be overheard in a crowded cafe, I guessed. "That's me." My heart skipped a beat. I'd never met anyone besides Nadia who knew my last name. and this felt serious. "I'm Alex Tremblay," she continued. "I used to work on Belle's team at Horizon Com. She asked me not to reach out. But I think you deserve to know the truth," I exhaled, pressing my back against the fridge. "Truth about what?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Alex hesitated. "Meet me at Rose's Cafe on Stark Street in 30 minutes. I don't have much time, and I don't want to talk on the phone." I grabbed my keys. "Okay, I'll be there." I glanced at Said's silhouette through the doorway. She was stacking toy blocks in her room, humming under her breath. I took one last look at her and whispered, "I'll be back soon, kiddo." Rose's Cafe was a modest spot with ivy-clad windows and the rich aroma of espresso drifting into the street. I slipped inside, the chatter of late-day patrons and clinking cups greeting me. In the far corner by a fog window, I spotted Alex. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, eyes darting around like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. She rose when I approached, offering a trembling smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, lowering her voice as I sat down. I nodded, leaning in. "I'm sorry it's like this." She glanced over her shoulder. I didn't want to believe Belle was capable of what she's done. But I can't stay silent anymore. I took a breath. "What have you learned?" Alex pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slipped it across the table. My fingers closed around it. "Jaime Holloway isn't just a friend. He's the key to her financial escape." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She opened the envelope and extracted a stack of printed bank records, offshore account statements, and a USB stick. "These are records I obtained from our finance department under the pretext of an audit. Rialel had access to certain accounts under her work credentials. She used that access to move our company's closing funds through intermediate shell companies, then funneled part of it into an account in Jaime's name in the Cayman Islands. From there, it went to her personal account in Marseille." My heart pounded so loudly, I thought the whole cafe would hear it. She stole from her company. Alex's eyes gleamed with shame and relief all at once. Not just the company. She emptied our joint personal savings too. But she mixed the transfers so that if anyone traced the money, it would look like a legitimate company wire for a marketing project. She paused, voice dropping. "I found an audio clip too." She slid the USB stick across the table. "Play it yourself if you want proof." I pocketed the stick and exhaled, staring at Alex. The betrayal stung anew. Not only was Belle turning her back on her family and me, she had leveraged her position of trust at work to steal from her employer and involve Jaime in the crime. Alex nodded, tears brimming. "I never meant for this to get so big. But when she laughed about it, when she joked that you'd crumble and that you could keep the blender, I knew you had to see it." I clenched my jaw, imagining Belle's voice mocking me, reducing my fears to punchlines. "You're brave to speak out," I said softly. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her confession hanging between us like a storm cloud. Then Alex reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. "I'm sorry, Michael, for everything." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "Let's get through this." That evening, after I tucked Sadi into bed and kissed her soft cheek, I retreated to the living room. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I plugged the USB stick into my laptop and clicked on the audio file. The recording crackled with ambient noise, clinking glasses, distant chatter before Belle's voice came through, clear and unrepentant. "Honestly, Jaime, he's a mess." She laughed, the note of amusement sharp enough to cut glass. "I told him it's just money. He'll sulk for a day, but he'll get over it. He doesn't know how big this transfer is. I said he could have the blender. Thought it would make a good joke. Jaime's voice followed, chuckling. He'll keep the apartment. Poor guy. But hey, we've got a seawall now, right? My stomach dropped. A seawall code for the money she'd funneled. She wasn't remorseful. She was amused. I closed my eyes, recalling the text that had started it all. Moving to France with Jaime. I emptied our savings. The words had felt final, devastating. But now I had proof of premeditation, collusion, and mockery. This evidence would pierce the veneer of her lies and expose the full breadth of her betrayal. The next morning, I bundled Sadi into her car seat and drove to Nadia's office. The envelope of company records and the USB stick in my briefcase. My hands gripped the wheel as I rehearsed the facts. Offshore shell accounts, diverted corporate funds, recorded admissions. This wasn't just theft. It was conspiracy, fraud, betrayal across every front. When I reached Nadia, she ushered me into her office, her expression sober. I laid out the documents and handed over the USB stick. She plugged it in, listened to the clip, her brow furrowing in determination. This changes everything, she said, pulling out fresh forms. We'll amend our motions to include corporate fraud and identity theft. Jaime Holloway can be subpoenaed, as can Horizon Com's financial records. The judge will see this as a comprehensive scheme, not just a marital dispute. Relief washed through me, mingled with righteous anger. Rial hadn't just run. She'd orchestrated a financial coup, enlisted her mother and co-worker, and tried to frame me as unstable. Now, with Alex's courage and Nadia's expertise, we would dismantle that scheme. Back at the apartment, I tucked Sadi into bed and watched her drift to sleep. In her peaceful face, I found the steel I needed. I picked up my phone and sent Belle a brief message. I have proof. We start motions tomorrow. I hit send, feeling the weight of finality and the promise of justice. As I closed the apartment door behind me, I sensed a shift in the air. The war had escalated, but I was no longer defenseless. With evidence in hand and allies by my side, I would not rest until every last account was restored, every lie exposed, and my daughter's future secured. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The courthouse loomed like a monument to cold justice, its gray walls rising against a leaden sky, as if daring anyone to challenge its authority. I parked in the visitor lot and took a steadying breath before stepping onto the marbled steps. In my briefcase, I carried the weight of our entire case. Bank statements, the envelope from Margaret, offshore records from Alex, the damning audio clip, and my own affidavit. Beside those papers lay Nadia's motions for emergency custody, support, and asset freezes. Today, all of it would go before a judge, and I prayed our evidence would cut through Belle's web of lies. Inside, the hallway smelled of polished wood and old carpeting. I passed rows of closed doors, each a doorway into someone's fate. My heart pounded, but I kept my head high. At room 312, I paused, smoothing my tie and tapping the briefcase handle. Nadia met me there with a reassuring nod. Her confidence was the keel, keeping me from capsizing. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. I swallowed and rattled out of breath. More than ever. The courtroom was hushed, except for the rustle of papers and the soft shuffle of feet. Jurors sat in a box to my right, their faces inscrutable. On the bench, Judge Lambert reviewed files under her bifocals, her expression neutral but keen. Beside her sat Belle's attorney, a sharply dressed man with a clipped accent and a notebook full of post-it tabs. Belle herself stood behind him, immaculately dressed in navy blue, hair pulled back, eyes cool and distant. At her side was her mother, Margaret, clasping purse straps so tightly her knuckles were white. Nadia whispered, "I'll present first." With a gentle squeeze of my hand, she rose and approached the bench. I watched her every step, every gesture. She unfolded her notes and began, "Your Honor, I represent Michael Carter, father of Sadie Carter, aged 5. We petition this court for emergency relief based on evidence of diversion of marital assets, parental abandonment, and ongoing efforts to mischaracterize Mr. Carter's actions. We seek temporary custody, a freeze on all accounts associated with MS. Nolan and her family, and immediate child support from the defendant." She paced slowly, laying out the timeline. She described the initial transfer of $18,000 to Marseille, the envelope from Margaret dated 3 months prior, and the offshore shell accounts revealed by Alex. She cited the audio clip in which Ms. Nolan laughed about emptying savings and mocking me. Finally, she handed over my affidavit, in which I described discovering the transfers, Belle's refusal to discuss finances, and the devastating impact on our family. Judge Lambert leaned forward, brows raised. "Miss Kim, is there evidence that this recording was obtained lawfully?" Nadia placed the USB stick on the bench. "Yes, Your Honor. Miss Tremblay provided it to my client under whistleblower provisions. We have a chain of custody log affidavit from MS, Tremblay and our bank's fraud investigator, confirming the authenticity of transactions and recording." The judge nodded slowly, reviewing the stick and folder. Next, she motioned toward Belle's attorney. He rose, clearing his throat. His voice slid out smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, while Ms. Kim paints a dramatic picture, much of her evidence is circumstantial. The transfers, though unfortunate, were authorized by both parties at the time. As for the recording, its origins are unclear. My client resigned of her own volition, seeking a fresh start. Mr. Carter's reaction, filing motion after motion, indicates instability and a vindictive attitude toward Ms. Nolan's pursuit of independence." He gestured to Belle, who sat stiffly. She raised a hand as if swatting away a fly. "I didn't steal anything. I used our savings to pay debts we accrued. Michael knew about it. He just chose not to act. I wanted a new life, unburdened by his micromanaging." Her words were clipped, rehearsed. I felt my chest tighten as she painted herself the victim and me the villain. Margaret's lawyer followed with a brief statement, accusing me of threatening texts, fabricating allegations to gain publicity. Margaret herself fixed me with a cold stare, lips pressed tight as though daring me to challenge her. My stomach churned, but through the days I saw Nadia's steady gaze. She rose again for her rebuttal, unfolding Alex's corporate records and the bank's fraud report. She highlighted the code used to disguise the transfers as company expenses. And she introduced the subpoena we'd filed to Horizon.com's finance department, requesting emails showing Belle's repeated withdrawal requests contravening company policy. Then Nadia turned to the recording. She pressed play on her tablet, and the courtroom filled with Belle's voice echoing off the walls. I watched as Belle's face pallid as Margaret's jaw slackened. The judge closed her eyes for a moment, as though absorbing the full impact of hearing a mother laugh at abandoning her own child. When the audio ended, Nadia closed her folder and fixed the judge with calm intensity. "Your Honor, what this recording demonstrates is clear intent and malice. My client has been maligned, his daughter endangered, and his trust betrayed. We asked for the relief necessary to protect this child and preserve the integrity of marital assets until a full hearing." The courtroom was silent. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Judge Lambert set down her pen and looked from me to Belle. "Based on the evidence before me, wire transfers without mutual consent Involvement of offshore accounts, the recorded admissions. I find probable cause to believe Ms. Nolan engaged in financial misconduct and parental abandonment. I grant Mr. Carter's motion for sole temporary custody of Sadi, effective immediately, and I order a freeze on all assets tied to Ms. Nolan, Jaime Holloway, and Margaret Nolan, pending further hearing. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Riel's attorney sputtered, nodding rapidly. Your Honor, may we request supervised visitation? Judge Lambert opened her notes. Ms. Nolan shall have supervised visitation at Mr. Carter's discretion to be arranged through family services. Any unsupervised contact is hereby prohibited. Further, Ms. Nolan and Ms. Nolan Sr. are to produce all financial records related to the transfers by next week or face contempt. She tapped her gavel softly. Court is adjourned. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then the gavel's crack echoed like thunder. I exhaled, my shoulders sagging as the gravity of the victory settled over me. Nadia slipped beside me, handing me the signed order. I pressed it to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. In the hallway, reporters and a handful of onlookers buzzed. But all I wanted was to leave this place with Sadi. Outside, the air had cleared, gray clouds parting to reveal pale sunlight. I took Nadia's arm, and we walked down the steps together. The judge's ruling had bought us time and security. I slid into my car, briefcase on the passenger seat, and started the engine. My phone buzzed, a text from Alex. You did it. I responded with a single word. Thanks. Driving toward Daycare, I felt exhaustion wash through me. But beneath it, the first true glimmer of relief. The legal thunder in that gray courthouse had broken the storm of betrayal. Now, with our assets frozen and custody secured, I could begin rebuilding our lives, one steady step at a time. And above all, I would remind Sadi every day that her daddy would move mountains to protect her. The follow had word of our case reached her former co-workers. I clicked open the message, revealing a tour note from Horizon Com's legal department requesting details about the alleged misuse of corporate resources. I hesitated. This inquiry was a two-edged sword. It could further substantiate our claims, or it could escalate the drama beyond my control. At 7:45 a.m., I packed Said's lunch and woke her for breakfast. Tucking a small drawing she'd made, rainbow suns and flying unicorns, into her bag. She bounded down the stairs, hair in sleepy tangles, and climbed onto her stool. I spooned oatmeal into her bowl, cinnamon swirling in the steam, and she ate with glassy eyes and murmured, "Thanks," before bounding out the door to catch the daycare van. Even though I was secure in custody, each goodbye still felt like a negotiation with a world uncertain. I kissed her temples, inhaled her strawberry shampoo scent, and whispered, "I'll see you tonight, kiddo." Once the van rumbled away, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the Horizon Com email. It asked for copies of any communications between Ms. Nolan and company finance, including emails, audits, or unusual transfer requests. I forwarded the message to Nadia with a brief note. Looks like they want the full story. She replied, "Perfect. Let's use this to corroborate Alex's documents. I'll craft a subpoena to ensure compliance." I exhaled, tapping my mug against the table. Each legal maneuver felt like a chess move, advancing toward checkmate against Belle and her family. I spent the next hour compiling the envelope from Margaret, the file of Alex's offshore statements, and the timeline I drafted. My printer word as pages slid out, emails, bank statements, the October 12th audio transcript. I organized them into a neat stack labeled in chronological order, then called Nadia to confirm our next hearing date. She reminded me, that in 2 days we would argue for identity theft charges and request compensation for legal fees. "We're closing in," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Stay sharp." After hanging up, I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest UPS store. Shipping 6 charts of evidence, complete with exhibits and affidavit, felt like sending a lifeline to the judge, a tangible thread tying our narrative together. As I sealed the last box, I noticed the clerk watching me with sympathetic eyes. I reminded myself of why I was doing this. Not for retribution, but for justice, for protecting Saadi and our future. Back home, the afternoon sun filtered through half-drawn blinds as I settled into the home office, drafting an email to Jaime Holloway's listed address, if he existed at all, to demand explanation for his involvement. I typed slowly, stating the facts clearly. His name on shell accounts, his laughter on the recording, and a request to confirm or deny association. Then I added, "Failure to respond will result in subpoena and potential charges." I paused, rereading the words. It felt surreal to confront a man I'd never met, but who had upturned my life. I pressed send, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. By early evening, a notification pinged. My email had been auto-forwarded to a generic no-reply server in the Cayman Islands. The message bounced back. I frowned, realizing we'd have to rely on legal compulsion to reach him. Nadia would like this. I noted it for her briefing. The moment I heard the front door click, my heart leapt. Sadie flew into my arms, her small frame nearly engulfed by my open coat. "Daddy?" she chirped, holding up her little shoe with a missing lace. "Miss Karen said I was brave today. I made a new friend named Lucas." Her excitement crackled like electricity. I kissed her cheek and asked about the lace, promising we'd fix it after dinner. I warmed up leftover spaghetti with the last of our butter and cheese, and we sat together on the couch as she recounted every detail of her day. The new friend, the finger painting, the snack she swapped for my string cheese. I listened, nodding, savoring her words like medicine. Still, part of my mind ticked over the timeline of tonight's tasks. Scanning Alex's documents for digital backup, reviewing depositions for tomorrow's draft motion, and possibly scheduling a meeting with a forensic accountant to trace the paper trail further. As twilight settled, I tucked Sadie into bed. She clutched her giraffe and yawned. "Daddy," she whispered, "will Mommy ever come back?" The innocence in her question cut through me. "I don't know," I said, brushing her hair from her forehead. "But right now, you and I have everything we need. We're safe and we're together." She closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, trusting me without reservation. Left alone in the living room, the apartment felt too big, too quiet. I powered on my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd been building, columns for date, amount, recipient, and notes. I updated it with the envelope date from Margaret's card and the offshore transfer dates from Alex's records. The list stretched across months, a testament to the calculated precision of their plan. Each entry fueled my resolve. At 9:30 p.m., I drafted a summary for Nadia, compiled new financial timeline, evidence forwarded to Horizon Com Legal, recorded bounced email to Jaime, prepared guest list for tomorrow's hearing. I hit send and leaned back, feeling the day's exhaustion sink in. The apartment lights glowed softly around me, illuminating the scattered evidence like stars guiding me through the darkness. I closed my eyes and pictured Said's peaceful face, her breathing even in sleep. In those dreams, she didn't worry about money or courtrooms. She just existed as a 5-year-old should. That vision steeled my purpose. Tomorrow, we'd stand before the judge again, backed by corporate records and forensic analysis, demanding accountability. This was more than protecting assets. It was protecting her childhood. Then, I shut my laptop and headed to the bedroom. As she stepped through the sliding doors, her eyes widened at the sudden presence of a court officer beside me. Panic flickered across her face when she saw the paperwork. "I came to fix this," she stammered, voice trembling. I leveled my gaze, calm but resolute. "Then explained the withdrawals last week," I said, pulling out the bank record showing a new transfer. Her mouth opened, then closed, words failing. The officer stepped forward with the order. "Miss Nolan, you're served." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded, too shocked to argue. I led her to the cafe across the hall for supervised visitation. Sadie peeked around a corner, eyes bright when she saw her mother. Belle knelt, reaching out, but Sadie hesitated. "Mommy drained my piggy bank," she whispered. Belle's shoulders slumped. I watched from across the table, pain and relief mingling in my chest. The restraining order was a barrier, but in that guarded moment, I realized the fight wasn't just legal. It was about teaching our daughter whom she could trust. Months have passed since the courthouse's gavel fell in our favor. And in that time, Sadie and I have transformed our lives into something steadier, brighter. We moved into a cozy bungalow near Alberta Park, its pale blue siding and tidy garden reflecting fresh beginnings. During the day, I revived my freelance design business, taking on local clients for logos and website refreshes. Each paycheck replenished what was rightfully ours. Porch by porch, brick by brick, I rebuilt our savings. Evenings became our sacred time, reading bedtime stories beneath a soft lamp glow, experimenting with new pancake recipes on Saturday mornings, and tracing our hands in sidewalk chalk outside our front step. I watched Saad's laughter bloom as she discovered fireflies and learned to ride her bike without training wheels. Her daddy echoed through the neighborhood, a joyous banner of resilience. Of course, legal battles continued. Subpoenas for offshore records, depositions confirming Margaret's identity theft, and asset recovery negotiations that dragged into late afternoons. But with Nadia's steady guidance, each obstacle became a victory. We reclaimed thousands, enough not only to cover the past debt, but to set aside for college and emergencies. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender, Sadie climbed into my lap with a drawing she'd just finished. Our new home, a rainbow stretching overhead and two stick figures holding hands. Beneath it, in careful scroll, she'd written, "Daddy's brave." I felt tears prick my eyes as I kissed her forehead. Her message, once meant to break me with fear of eviction, had ignited something stronger, a truth unshakable and enduring. In the wreckage of betrayal, I found purpose and strength. And as the rain began to patter softly against our window, I realized that home isn't just a place. It's built on love, honesty, and the promise that we'll face any storm together.